For more than 130 years, one question has drifted through the fog of Victorian London and refused to die. In the autumn of 1888, a killer stalked the streets of Whitechapel, murdered without mercy, and then vanished into history. He was never caught. He was never named. The world only ever knew him as Jack the Ripper. Whitechapel, in 1888, was a place the wealthy pretended not to see. Crushing poverty, filth, and hunger filled its narrow lanes. The women who lived here survived however they could, walking the dark streets at night with nothing to protect them. It was the perfect hunting ground, and something inhuman had begun to hunt. On the last night of August, the body of a woman named Mary Ann Nichols was found in a Whitechapel gutter. Her throat had been cut. It was savage, deliberate, and cold. The people of the East End told themselves it was a single madman, a one-off horror. They were wrong. Within weeks came another, then another. 5 murders would come to define the terror, each one more brutal than the last, all within a few streets of one another. Panic swept through London. Every shadow became a suspect. And the killer, whoever he was only getting started. Welcome to the world of strange. The night of the double event. 2 women murdered within an hour, barely streets apart. Then the letters began to arrive. One, sent to a news agency and written in red ink, mocked the police and promised more killing. It was signed with a name that would echo for a century: Jack the Ripper. Whether it came from the killer or a cruel hoaxer, the name stuck, and a legend was born. A second letter was even worse. Titled simply From Hell, it arrived with part of a human kidney, taken, the writer claimed, from one of his victims. He said he had fried and eaten the rest. Whoever wrote it wanted London to know he felt no fear and no remorse. On a cold November morning, the killer struck for the last time, indoors, and with a savagery that broke even hardened investigators. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the killing stopped. No arrest, no final victim, nothing but silence, and a city holding its breath. The hunt for the Ripper was the largest London had ever seen, and it was almost hopeless. There were no fingerprints, no cameras, no forensic science. Detectives chased thousands of tips and hundreds of suspects through the fog. Yet more than a century later, a handful of names still rise again and again from the darkness. The first was a young barrister named Montague Druitt. Weeks after the final murder, his body was pulled from the River Thames. A senior policeman later named him as a prime suspect, believing the killings had ended because the killer had drowned himself. But the evidence against him was thin and mostly circumstantial. Then came the most sensational theory of all, that the Ripper was a member of the royal family itself, protected by a conspiracy of the powerful. It made for a thrilling story of cover-ups and secret societies. But the prince at its center had firm alibis, far from London on the nights of the murders. Historians have long dismissed it. Still, the rumor never quite died. A century later, a famous crime novelist accused a respected Victorian painter, pointing to disturbing imagery in his work and letters. She spent a fortune trying to prove it. Yet for all her certainty, no hard evidence ever tied his hand to the knife. He remains a suspect of suspicion, not of proof. But the police had their own favorite, a poor Polish barber named Aaron Kosminski, who lived in the very heart of the murder district and was later locked away in an asylum. his mind consumed by paranoia and rage. One officer claimed a witness had identified him directly, only to refuse to testify. For decades, he was the leading name that could never quite be nailed down. Then, in our own century, came the twist. A researcher claimed to have tested an old shawl said to have been taken from one of the victims. He announced that the genetic traces upon it matched the family of Aaron Kosminski. To some, it was the answer at last. The Ripper finally had a name. But the claim was fiercely disputed. No one could prove the shawl had ever truly touched a victim, and the genetic evidence was far from certain. And so, even now, the fog will not lift. Aaron Kosminski is the closest history has come to a face in the darkness, and still it is not proof. More than a century of theories, confessions, and obsession, and the truth remains just out of reach. The killer took his name, his face, and his reasons into the fog with him, and the fog has never given them back. Perhaps we already know his name. Perhaps we never will. This has been the world of strange.